The security camera footage was crystal clear. Karen Morrison, dressed in black like some suburban commando, army crawling under the fence at 2:47 a.m. But what she found waiting for her in that tunnel the next morning wasn't just dirt and roots, it was 3 tons of industrial concrete, and Sarah Chen standing above with a knowing smile. "You wanted to play games with my property line, Karen? Well, congratulations. The first crack appeared in Sarah Chen's fence on a Tuesday morning in late September, and with it, the first crack in her carefully constructed piece. She discovered it while tending to her vegetable garden. The one thing that had kept her sane through the divorce, through the custody battle, through the slow, grinding process of rebuilding her life from the ashes of a 20-year marriage. The wooden slat hung at an odd angle, splintered where someone had clearly forced it aside. "Mom, what's wrong?" 8-year-old Emma looked up from where she was collecting cherry tomatoes, her small hands already stained red. "Nothing, sweetheart, just some damage to the fence." Sarah kept her voice level, but her jaw tightened as she examined the break more closely. The wood hadn't weathered or rotted, it had been deliberately pried apart, leaving fresh splinters that caught the morning light. Through the gap, she could see directly into Karen Morrison's pristine backyard, where not a single blade of grass dared grow out of place. Karen herself stood at her kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, watching them with the kind of predatory attention that made Sarah's skin crawl. Their eyes met through the glass, and Karen raised her mug in a mock toast before disappearing back into her house. "That woman gives me the creeps," Emma muttered, wise beyond her years. "Emma Chen? That's not how we talk about our neighbors. But Mom, she's always staring at us. And yesterday she told Mrs. Peterson that our garden makes the whole street look trashy." Emma made air quotes with her dirt-stained fingers. "Mrs. Peterson told me when I was walking Buster." Sarah's hands stilled on the broken fence slat. Karen Morrison had been a thorn in her side since the day she'd moved into the Maplewood subdivision 6 months ago. But this felt different, more invasive, more personal. The Morrisons had arrived like conquering generals, immediately filing complaints with the HOA about everything from Sarah's non-regulation mailbox to the height of her grass. When the HOA president, a reasonable man named Ted Hoffman, had politely explained that Sarah's property predated the current regulations and was grandfathered in, Karen had begun a campaign of petty warfare that would have impressed Napoleon. First came the noise complaints filed every time Emma played in the backyard after 6 p.m., then the property line disputes, with Karen claiming that Sarah's vegetable garden encroached on her land by exactly 3 inches. When the county surveyor proved Karen wrong, she'd switch tactics to filing complaints about agricultural odors from Sarah's small compost bin. But this was escalation. Sarah pulled out her phone and took photos of the damage from multiple angles in the divorce. Marcus had gotten the house in Westfield, the vacation cabin, and most of their mutual friends. Sarah had gotten Emma, the dog, in this modest 3-bedroom in a subdivision that was trying too hard to be upscale. She'd poured every ounce of energy she had left into making it a sanctuary for her daughter. She wouldn't let Karen Morrison take that away. "Go inside and wash up for lunch," she told Emma. "I need to make a phone call." Ted Hoffman answered on the second ring. "Sarah, how are you holding up?" "I've been better. Ted, someone damaged my fence last night, and I'm pretty sure I know who." A pause. "Karen Morrison. The gap looks directly into my backyard, into Emma's play area." Sarah kept her voice steady, professional. Ted was a good man, but he was also trying to keep peace in a neighborhood where Karen Morrison had already filed 17 separate complaints in 6 months. "Do you have proof it was her?" "Not yet. But Ted, this is harassment. She's trying to make us feel unsafe in our own home." "I hear you, Sarah. I really do. But my hands are tied unless you have evidence of wrongdoing. Document everything. And if you catch her in the act, call the police immediately." After hanging up, Sarah stared at the broken fence slat. Evidence. She could get evidence. That afternoon, she drove to Morrison Electronics, the big box store where her ex, Jake, worked in security. They'd maintained a friendship despite the divorce. Jake had never liked Marcus much anyway. "I need a favor," she said, finding him in the surveillance equipment aisle, ostensibly straightening inventory. Jake looked up, his weathered face creasing into a grin. "Sarah Chen asking for favors. This must be good. What kind of trouble are you in the neighbor kind? I need to set up some security cameras around my property." "Ah." Jake's expression grew serious. "The infamous Karen Morrison. You know about her?" "Honey, half the contractors in town know about her. She's called the city on 3 different landscaping crews for improper mulch application, whatever the hell that means." He pulled a small wireless camera from the shelf. "These little beauties are motion activated, night vision, connect straight to your phone. How many trouble spots are we talking about?" "Just the back fence for now. But Jake, I need ones that are really hard to spot planning something sneaky." "Planning to protect my daughter." Jake's expression hardened. "Say no more. Let's get you set up." By evening, 3 nearly invisible cameras monitored Sarah's backyard from different angles. She tested the app on her phone, watching Emma and their golden retriever Buster play fetch in real time from her kitchen window. Emma went to bed at 8:30, exhausted from a day of school and afternoon soccer practice. Sarah tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and promised to make pancakes in the morning. Mom. Emma's voice was small in the darkness. Are we safe here? The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. Of course we're safe, baby. Why would you ask? That sometimes I see Mrs. Morrison looking at our house at night, from her upstairs window. It makes me scared. Sarah sat back down on the edge of the bed, smoothing Emma's dark hair. You don't need to be scared of Mrs. Morrison. She's just lonely, I think. Sometimes lonely people do things that seem strange. Will you check my window lock? Sarah checked the window lock, then the one in the living room, then her own bedroom. All secure. But Emma's words had planted a seed of genuine unease. Karen Morrison watching their house at night. That crossed a line from petty harassment into something much darker. At 11:47 p.m., Sarah's phone buzzed with a motion alert. She sat up in bed, heart pounding, and opened the camera app. The night vision showed her backyard in ghostly green detail, everything quiet and still. She was about to dismiss it as a false alarm when she saw the shadow. Someone was crouched by her back fence, working at the broken slat with what looked like a crowbar. The figure was dressed in dark clothing, face obscured by a baseball cap. But the build and movements were unmistakably female. Sarah's hands shook as she started recording. Karen Morrison was in her backyard, at midnight, systematically widening the hole in the fence. But it got worse. As Sarah watched in horrified fascination, Karen didn't just break the fence, she crawled through the gap she'd created, emerging fully into Sarah's yard like some kind of suburban burglar. Once inside, she moved with surprising purpose, crossing directly to the garden shed, where Sarah kept her tools and lawn equipment. The shed was locked, but Karen produced something from her pocket lock picks, a key somehow, and had it open within 30 seconds. Sarah should have called the police, should have confronted her, should have done any number of sensible, reasonable things. Instead, she watched in morbid fascination as Karen Morrison disappeared into her shed. 5 minutes later, Karen emerged carrying Sarah's expensive Japanese pruning shears and her favorite trowel. She made her way back to the fence, but instead of leaving immediately, she stopped at Sarah's prized tomato plants, the ones that had taken her 3 months to nurture from seedlings. The night vision couldn't capture color, but Sarah didn't need to see red to know what was happening. Karen systematically destroyed 6 plants, cutting through stems and digging up roots with surgical precision. When she was finished, she placed Sarah's own tools in the middle of the destruction like some kind of twisted calling card. Only then did she crawl back through the fence, pulling the broken slat back into place behind her. Sarah's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the phone. The video was clear, damning, and absolutely insane. Who did something like this? What kind of person broke into their neighbor's yard to destroy their garden with their own tools? She called 911 immediately. 911, what's your emergency? Someone just broke into my backyard and vandalized my property. I have it all on video. The police arrived 20 minutes later, 2 officers. One young and eager, one older and clearly tired of domestic disputes. Sarah met them at the front door, phone in hand, Emma still sleeping upstairs. Ma'am, I'm Officer Bradley. This is Officer Chun, no relation. I assume. The older cop's name tag read Bradley, and his tone suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. No relation. Look, I have the whole thing recorded. Sarah held up her phone. My neighbor crawled under my fence and destroyed my garden. Officer Chun, the younger one, perked up with interest. You have video evidence of breaking and entering, and trespassing, and destruction. The next morning brought Emma's tears and Karen Morrison's lies in equal measure. My tomatoes, Emma wailed, kneeling in the dirt beside the destroyed plants. Mom, who would do this? Why would someone hurt our garden? Sarah crouched beside her daughter, fighting the urge to march next door and drag Karen Morrison out by her perfectly styled hair. I don't know, baby, but we'll plant new ones, better ones. But these were special. We grew them from seeds. Emma's 8-year-old heart was breaking, and Sarah felt something dark and protective unfurl in her chest like a poison flower. Through the gap in the fence, she could see Karen in her backyard, pruning her roses with theatrical precision. The woman was humming as she worked, occasionally glancing toward the destruction she'd caused with barely concealed satisfaction. Officer Bradley arrived at 9:30, looking like he'd rather be directing traffic. Officer Chen was nowhere to be seen. Morning, Mrs. Chen. Ready to file that report? It's Miss Chen. And yes, I'm ready. Sarah handed him a folder she'd prepared at dawn. Copies of the video, screenshots of the threatening text message, photos of the damage, and a timeline of harassment incidents going back 6 months. Bradley flipped through the documentation with growing surprise. This is ... very thorough. A teacher organization is my superpower, right? Well, let's go talk to Mrs. Morrison. They found Karen in her front yard, watering flower boxes that clearly didn't need watering. She was dressed in a pale pink jogging suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly grocery budget. Her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail. She looked up with manufactured surprise as they approached. Oh, Officer ... Bradley, is it what brings you to our lovely neighborhood this morning? Ma'am, we need to discuss an incident that occurred on Ms. Chen's property last night. Karen's expression shifted to concerned confusion so smoothly that Sarah almost admired the performance. An incident? How terrible. What happened? Someone broke into her backyard and vandalized her garden? We have video evidence showing video evidence. Karen's voice pitched higher. Of what, exactly? Officer Bradley pulled out his phone. Of you crawling under the fence and destroying her plants with her own tools? For just a moment, Karen's mask slipped. Sarah caught a flash of something cold and calculating before the concerned neighbor expression snapped back into place. I'm sorry, officer, but that's simply impossible. I was home all evening, and I certainly didn't crawl under anyone's fence. That would be ... double quotes. She gave a delicate shudder. ... undignified. Ma'am, we have clear video footage. May I see this alleged footage? Bradley hesitated, then showed her the phone screen. Sarah watched Karen's face as she viewed her own criminal activity, looking for any sign of guilt or recognition. Instead, Karen laughed. Not a nervous laugh or an embarrassed giggle, but a genuine, delighted laugh that made Sarah's blood run cold. Officer Bradley, surely you can't be serious. This fuzzy, green video could be anyone. Some random vagrant, perhaps. The image quality is so poor you can barely make out a human form, let alone identify a specific person. Sarah stepped forward. The build matches yours exactly. The movement patterns, the way I, what? Are you claiming to be an expert in identifying people from security footage? Sarah Karen's voice carried just enough condescension to make Officer Bradley shift uncomfortably, because I watch enough crime shows to know that eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable. This isn't eyewitness testimony. It's video evidence of someone in dark clothing, filmed in poor lighting conditions, allegedly committing vandalism. Karen turned back to Bradley with a sympathetic smile. Officer, I understand that Sarah has been under tremendous stress since her divorce. Single, motherhood is challenging, and sometimes people see threats where none exist. The implication hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Sarah felt her face flush hot. Are you suggesting I fabricated evidence? I'm suggesting that grief and paranoia can make people see things that aren't there. Perhaps you should consider counseling. Officer Bradley looked between them like a referee in a tennis match. Ladies, let's keep this civil. Mrs. Morrison, where were you between 11:30 p.m. and 1 a.m. last night? At home? Asleep. My husband can verify that. We'll need to speak with him. Unfortunately, Richard is in Chicago on business until Thursday, but I'm sure our security system will show that I never left the house. Sarah's heart sank. Of course. Karen had an alibi. Of course, she'd planned for this. We'll need to review your security footage, Bradley said. Absolutely. I'll have Richard pull the files when he returns. We're always happy to cooperate with law enforcement. Karen's smile was pristine, helpful, and completely devoid of human warmth. As they walked back to Sarah's house, Officer Bradley's expression was apologetic but resigned. Without corroborating evidence or a confession, it's going to be hard to make charges stick. The video shows her clearly. The video shows someone who could be her. But any halfway decent lawyer will argue reasonable doubt, especially with her husband providing an alibi. The threatening text came from her phone. From an unknown number, she claimed someone spoofed it, or that her phone was compromised, or any number of technical explanations that create doubt. Sarah stared at him. So she gets away with it. I didn't say that. We'll investigate thoroughly, but I want you to have realistic expectations about the likely outcome. After Bradley left, Sarah sat on her back porch and called her sister in Portland. Lisa, I need to ask you something hypothetical. Oh God, what did Marcus do now? This isn't about Marcus, it's about my neighbor. Hypothetically, if someone was harassing you and the police couldn't help, what would you do? A pause. Hypothetically, I'd make them regret ever meeting me. But you're not me, Sarah. You're the responsible one. Remember, maybe I'm tired of being responsible. Sarah Chen, you're scaring me. What exactly is happening? Sarah told her everything. The months of complaints, the escalating harassment, Karen's midnight raid, the destroyed garden, the threatening text, and the police's obvious skepticism. Jesus Christ, Lisa breathed. This woman is unhinged. Have you considered moving? With what money? This house is all Emma and I have left. I'm not letting some suburban psychopath drive us away from our home. Then what are you going to do? Sarah looked through the gap in her fence, where Karen was back in her garden, pruning roses that didn't need pruning, and humming that same infuriating tune. I'm going to beat her at her own game. That afternoon, while Emma was at soccer practice, Sarah drove to the public library and spent 2 hours researching property law, harassment statutes, and HOA regulations. She made copies of relevant documents, took notes in her careful teacher's handwriting, and began to formulate a plan. Step 1. Documentation. If the police needed evidence, she'd give them evidence. She ordered 3 more security cameras online, including one with facial recognition capability. She set up a dedicated email account for logging incidents. She created a spreadsheet to track dates, times, and witnesses. Step 2. Escalation. Karen Morrison thought she was untouchable because she had money and a husband with connections. But Sarah had something Karen didn't. She had nothing left to lose. At 6 p.m., Sarah was in her kitchen making dinner when her phone buzzed with another motion alert. Emma was upstairs doing homework, Buster was napping on the couch, and according to the camera app, someone was once again at her back fence. But this time, Sarah was ready. She grabbed the baseball bat Marcus had left behind, one of the few useful things from their marriage, and slipped out the back door as quietly as possible. The motion-activated lights stayed off, thanks to electrical tape she'd applied that afternoon. In the darkness, she could just make out a figure crouched by the fence gap. But instead of breaking in, this time Karen was doing something else entirely. She was setting up what looked like a small device just inside Sarah's property line, a camera. Karen Morrison was installing surveillance equipment in Sarah's yard. Sarah's grip tightened on the bat. This went beyond harassment, beyond trespassing, beyond simple neighborly disputes. This was stalking. This was predatory behavior. This was also Sarah's chance. She activated her phone's video recording and stepped into the light. Karen, the figure at the fence, spun around so fast, she nearly fell over. In the sudden illumination from Sarah's phone flashlight, Karen Morrison's face was stark white, her eyes wide with shock and something that might have been fear. Sarah, this isn't what it looks like, really, because it looks like you're installing a camera on my property without permission, which is illegal surveillance, harassment, and trespassing all at once. Karen glanced toward the device she'd been mounting, definitely a camera, small and wireless, and pointed directly toward Sarah's house. I was just concerned about security. In the neighborhood there have been reports of vandalism. Vandalism, you committed. That's a serious accusation. It's also true. Sarah kept her phone camera trained on Karen's face, documenting every word. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to remove that camera, apologize for your behavior, and leave my family alone, or I'm going to make your life very, very difficult. Karen's shock was morphing into something uglier. Her perfectly composed mask was slipping, revealing glimpses of the person who'd crawled under a fence to destroy it. The Davidson construction rabbit hole went deeper than Sarah had ever imagined, and by 3 a.m. she was drowning in a sea of public records, court filings, and newspaper archives that painted a picture of systematic corruption stretching back 15 years. Bid rigging, substandard materials, safety violations that had resulted in 2 worker deaths, environmental violations that had contaminated a elementary school's water supply, and at the center of it all, Richard Morrison, regional VP, whose signature appeared on dozens of documents that should have sent him to federal prison. Instead, he'd received promotions. Sarah's teacher brain, trained to research and synthesize information, began connecting dots that formed a web of protection reaching into City Hall, the county courthouse, and the state legislature. Davidson Construction didn't just build buildings, they built relationships. The kind that kept investigations varied and whistleblowers silenced. But they'd made one critical error. Everything was documented. Public records laws meant that every filed complaint, every settled lawsuit, every closed investigation left a paper trail. And Sarah Chen had all night to follow it. By morning, she had 47 pages of printed evidence, and a plan that would have terrified her former self. "Mom, you look terrible," Emma observed over breakfast, spooning cereal into her mouth while eyeing Sarah's coffee-stained clothes and wild hair. "Thanks, kiddo. Mommy had trouble sleeping." "Is it because of the mean lady next door?" Sarah paused, spoon halfway to her mouth. "What makes you think that?" "I heard you talking to yourself last night. You said bad words." "What kind of bad words?" "You called her." Emma lowered her voice to a whisper. "A corrupt bitch." Sarah nearly choked on her coffee. "Emma Chen, we don't use that language." "You did." "Well, Mommy was very frustrated, but that's not an excuse." Emma considered this gravely. "Is Mrs. Morrison going to hurt us?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her was living in fear because of Karen Morrison's psychological warfare? That was unacceptable. "No, baby. Mommy is going to make sure Mrs. Morrison can't hurt anyone ever again." After dropping Emma at school, Sarah drove to the offices of the Maplewood Tribune, a weekly newspaper that barely qualified as journalism but had one thing going for it: a publisher named Janet Reeves who'd been trying to break a story about local construction corruption for 3 years that Sarah had found. Janet's name buried in a footnote of a dismissed lawsuit against Davidson Construction, a footnote that mentioned investigative inquiries and pending publication. The Tribune occupied a strip mall space between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. Janet Reeves turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, with ink-stained fingers and the hungry look of a journalist who'd been waiting her entire career for the story that would make her reputation. "You hear about Davidson Construction?" Janet said before Sarah had even introduced herself. "I can smell it on you. The obsession, the need to expose the truth." "How much do you know?" "I know Richard Morrison should be in federal prison. I know Davidson Construction has been buying protection for 15 years, and I know his wife is using his connections to terrorize my family." Janet's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Sit down, tell me everything." Sarah told her about Karen's harassment campaign, the midnight break-in, the installed surveillance camera, and Karen's threats about Richard's influence. She showed Janet the videos, the text messages, the documented timeline of escalating behavior. "This is beautiful," Janet breathed, taking notes faster than Sarah could talk. "Personal harassment connected to institutional corruption. A human interest angle on a story I've been trying to crack for years. But I need more than your neighbor's bad behavior. I need evidence of actual criminal activity by Davidson Construction. I might have that too." Sarah pulled out her folder of research. Bid rigging on the county courthouse renovation, substandard concrete that led to structural failures at Riverside Elementary, environmental violations at the Morrison Heights development that they covered up with falsified soil reports. Janet flipped through the documents, muttering under her breath, "How did you get all this? Public records requests, court filings, OSHA reports. It's all there, scattered across different agencies. Nobody bothered to connect the dots. Nobody except you." Janet looked up with something approaching. "You know what this means, right? If I can corroborate even half of this, it means Richard Morrison goes down, and his wife loses her protection. It means a lot more than that. Davidson Construction has been a cancer on this community for years. They've hurt people, Sarah, families, children. If we can expose them, double quotes, when," Sarah corrected, "when we expose them." Janet grinned. "I like your confidence, but this kind of investigation takes time, months, maybe years. Can you wait that long for justice?" Sarah thought about Emma asking if they were safe, about Karen's camera watching their every move, about the threatening text message and the destroyed garden, and the promise of more harassment to come. "I can't wait years, but I don't need to destroy the entire company. I just need to neutralize one regional VP and his psychotic wife." "What did you have in mind?" Sarah pulled out a final document, a state contract for highway construction that Richard Morrison had signed 2 weeks ago. "This project uses federal funds, which means federal oversight. If someone were to file a complaint with the right agencies about potential bid rigging, the feds would freeze the contract pending investigation. Davidson Construction would lose millions, and Richard Morrison would be radioactive." Janet nodded slowly. "But you need evidence of actual bid manipulation, not just suspicious patterns." "What if the evidence came from inside the company? You have an inside source." "Not yet, but I'm about to get one." That afternoon, Sarah drove to Davidson Construction's regional headquarters, a gleaming glass building that screamed new money and questionable ethics. She'd changed into her most professional outfit, the navy suit she'd worn to court during the divorce, and carried a briefcase that contained everything she'd learned about the company's criminal activities. She wasn't there to confront Richard Morrison. She was there to recruit someone who could. The lobby directory listed dozens of employees, but Sarah was looking for one specific title: internal auditor, someone whose job it was to review company finances and compliance. Someone who might have noticed irregularities, but lacked the power or platform to expose them. Marcus Chen, internal auditor, Suite 427. Sarah stared at the nameplate for a full minute, feeling the universe's twisted sense of humor. Her ex-husband worked for Davidson Construction. The man who'd left her for his secretary, who'd fought her for custody, who'd tried to paint her as an unstable single mother, was employed by the very company that was protecting her tormentor. Marcus had always been weak, selfish, and motivated primarily by self-preservation, but he'd also been a good accountant, and accountants noticed when numbers didn't add up. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt like ascending to the gates of hell. Marcus looked up from his computer when she knocked on his office door, his face cycling through surprise, confusion, and resignation in rapid succession. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" "Hello, Marcus. We need to talk." He glanced around nervously, as if afraid his colleagues might see his ex-wife in his office. "If this is about Emma's birthday party, we discussed it's not about Emma, it's about your employer." Marcus's expression shifted to something approaching panic. "Sarah, you can't be here. If Richard finds out," "Richard Morrison, your boss, the man whose wife has been terrorizing your daughter? What are you talking about?" Sarah closed the office door and sat down without being invited. "Karen Morrison has been harassing Emma and me for months, breaking into our property, destroying our garden, making threats. She told me that Richard could have me fired, foreclosed on, and blacklisted with a phone call." Marcus went pale. "Karen Morrison is Richard's wife. You didn't know it?" "We don't exactly move in the same social circles. I knew he was married, but double quotes." Marcus rubbed his face with both hands. "Sarah, you can't involve me in neighbor disputes. My job, your job, is about to disappear anyway." Sarah opened her briefcase and spread documents across his desk. "Unless you help me stop them?" Marcus picked up the top sheet, an OSHA report detailing safety violations that had resulted in a worker's death. His hands began to shake. "Where did you get these? Public records, court filings, government databases? It's all legitimate, Marcus. It's all true. And it's all connected to the man who signs your paychecks." Marcus flipped through the documents, his accountant's eye-catching details that would have escaped most people. "These bid amounts, The timing of these contracts, Sarah, This looks like double quotes systematic fraud. I know. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Nothing. Sarah, I can't get involved in this. I have a mortgage, a car payment, a fiance. You have a daughter who's being terrorized by your boss's wife. Marcus's face crumpled. I can't lose this job. After the divorce, after everything, this is all I have left. Sarah felt a familiar surge of disgust at her ex-husband's cowardice, but also a glimmer of opportunity. Marcus was scared, desperate, and deeply invested in self-preservation. She could work with that. What if I told you that staying silent will cost you more than speaking up? The flash drive felt like a live grenade in Sarah's pocket as she sat in Janet Reeves' cramped office at 7 a.m. the next morning, watching the journalist's eyes grow wider with each document she reviewed. Holy shit, Janet breathed, scrolling through the bid-rigging emails. Sarah, this isn't just corruption. This is a federal RICO case waiting to happen. How long before you can publish? I need to verify sources, get legal review, maybe reach out to some of the officials mentioned for comment. How long? Janet looked up from the computer screen. 2 weeks minimum, maybe 3. I don't have 3 weeks. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Janet the security footage from Richard Morrison's office. He knows someone was in his files. He's armed, and he's making phone calls to people who don't sound like legitimate business contacts. Janet watched the video twice, her expression growing grim. This changes things. If Morrison feels cornered, he'll eliminate the threat, which means me, Marcus, and anyone else who might expose him. You need to go to the FBI today. With what? Circumstantial evidence and a neighbor dispute? They'll tell me to file a complaint with local police and wait for the bureaucracy to grind forward. Sarah shook her head. I need leverage now. Something that forces Richard Morrison to call off his wife immediately. Janet was quiet for a long moment, studying the documents spread across her desk. There might be a way, but it's risky. Everything's risky now. The Riverside Highway project doesn't just involve federal funds, it involves federal environmental regulations. If the EPA got an anonymous tip about potential violations, they'd be required to investigate immediately. That would freeze the entire project pending review. How immediately? 24 hours? Maybe 48? Janet pulled up a government website on her computer. The EPA has an online reporting system for environmental violations. If someone were to submit detailed allegations about contaminated soil reports and illegal dumping, Sarah leaned forward. What kind of allegations? The kind supported by these internal emails about falsified environmental assessments, the kind that would trigger an immediate site inspection and contract suspension. And if the contract gets suspended, Davidson Construction loses $50 million. Richard Morrison becomes a liability to his own company. His protection evaporates overnight. Sarah stared at the EPA reporting form on Janet's screen. It was elegant in its simplicity, a digital nuclear option that could destroy Richard Morrison's career with a few mouse clicks. What's the risk? If they trace the complaint back to you, and if Morrison has the connections you think he does, you could face retaliation, lost job, legal harassment, maybe worse. Janet's expression was grave. These aren't people who forgive and forget. They're also not people who respond to reasonable requests. Sarah thought about Emma, asking if they were safe, about camera watching their every move, about the destroyed garden, and the threatening texts. Do it. Janet's fingers hovered over the keyboard. You're sure? I'm sure. The EPA complaint took 20 minutes to file. Janet included detailed allegations supported by specific document references, email timestamps, and financial records. She attached excerpts from the stolen files, enough to prove credibility without revealing the full scope of their evidence. When she hit submit, Sarah felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. Now what? She asked. Now we wait, and hope that Morrison's bosses care more about federal investigations than they do about personal loyalty. Sarah didn't have to wait long. At 10:30 a.m., while she was teaching second-grade math, her phone buzzed. With a text from an unknown number, meet me at Riverside Park, noon, come alone. RM. Sarah stared at the message, her hands beginning to shake. Richard Morrison wanted a face-to-face meeting. That could mean negotiation, or it could mean something much worse. She texted back, public place, daylight, I'll be there. The response came immediately. Smart woman, we have much to discuss. Riverside Park was a sprawling complex of walking trails, playgrounds, and picnic areas that stayed busy even on weekdays. Sarah arrived early and chose a bench near the main pavilion, where dozens of people were visible at all times. She'd left copies of all her evidence with Janet Reeves, along with instructions to contact the FBI if Sarah didn't check in by 2 p.m. Richard Morrison appeared at exactly noon, walking across the parking lot like a man who owned everything he saw. He was smaller than Sarah had expected, maybe 5'8", soft around the middle, with the kind of expensive haircut that couldn't quite hide male pattern baldness, but his eyes were cold and calculating, the eyes of a man accustomed to getting his way through intimidation. He sat down beside her without invitation, close enough that she could smell his cologne and see the bulge of the weapon in his jacket. Ms. Chen, thank you for coming, Mr. Morrison. I assume you know why we're here. I assume you think you're very clever. His voice was conversational, almost friendly. Breaking into my office, stealing confidential documents, filing false complaints with federal agencies, quite an impressive campaign for a divorced school teacher. The complaints aren't false. No, they're not. Which makes you considerably more dangerous than I initially thought. Richard turned to face her fully. Do you have children, Ms. Chen? The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. You stay away from my daughter. I have no interest in harming children. But I am very interested in protecting my family, my business, and my way of life. The question is, how far are you willing to go to protect yours? Sarah met his gaze steadily. As far as necessary. I was hoping you'd say that. It makes this conversation much simpler. Richard pulled out his phone and showed her a video clip. This is security footage from my building last night. You entering through the front door at 6:15 p.m.? Sarah's stomach clenched, but she kept her expression neutral. This, he continued, swiping to another video, is keycard access logs showing that you used Marcus Chen's credentials to enter my office. I assume Marcus is your ex-Spania. That's not. Please don't insult my intelligence. The divorce records are public, and Marcus has been acting nervous for weeks. I had to check his computer this morning. Quite a lot of research into federal contracting laws and whistleblower protections. Sarah felt the walls closing in around her. Richard Morrison had connected all the dots, traced all the evidence back to its source. She was trapped. Here's what's going to happen, Richard continued. You're going to withdraw your EPA complaint. You're going to return all the documents you stole. You're going to convince your journalist friend to kill her story. And you're going to disappear from my radar permanently. And if I don't, Marcus will be arrested for corporate espionage and face federal charges that could put him in prison for 20 years. Your mortgage will be called in immediately. I believe the bank president owes me a favor. Your teaching contract will be terminated for conduct unbecoming based on evidence of criminal activity, and your daughter will be removed from your custody pending investigation of your fitness as a parent. Each threat hit Sarah like a hammer blow. Richard Morrison wasn't just powerful, he was thorough. He'd identified every pressure point in her life and prepared to destroy them all. You're blackmailing me. I'm explaining consequences. Your actions have created problems that require solutions. And your wife's harassment campaign, does that require solutions too? Richard's expression didn't change. Karen can be enthusiastic in protecting our interests, but she's never broken any laws. She broke into my property. She destroyed my garden. She installed surveillance equipment on my land. Alleged property damage that you can't prove. A camera that was installed on the property line for security purposes. Minor disputes between neighbors that hardly rise to the level of criminal activity. Sarah realized with growing horror that Richard Morrison had planned for this confrontation. Every move Karen had made, every escalation in the harassment campaign, had been calculated to stay just below the threshold of serious legal consequences. They'd been playing a longer game than she'd understood. What do you want from me? Complete surrender. Withdraw the complaint, return the documents, and move out of the neighborhood within 30 days. Move out. The house next to ours just went on the market. Karen would prefer not to have difficult neighbors. I'm prepared to offer you fair market value. Cash. With a quick closing? You want to buy my house? I want to solve a problem. Your presence in our neighborhood has become disruptive. Relocation seems like the most efficient solution. Sarah stared across the park, watching families enjoying their Saturday afternoon. Children playing on swings, couples walking hand in hand. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that monsters in expensive suits were casually discussing the destruction of everything she'd built for her daughter. I need time to think. You have until Monday morning. After that, the consequences I've outlined begin immediately. Richard stood up, smoothing his jacket over the concealed weapon. Oh, and Miss Chen, if you're considering going to the police or the FBI with wild stories about threats and corruption, remember that you're a desperate single mother who committed breaking and entering, while I'm a respected businessman with an exemplary reputation. Consider how that conversation will go. He walked away without looking back, leaving Sarah alone on the bench with the